Real good to start. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are hosting a 4-night series every Tuesday at 5:30 for the next 4 Tuesdays. So the theme of it is protecting teen health in Stoughton. So tonight's topic is teen mental health. We're just going to go around and introduce ourselves quickly before we get started. So I'm Melissa Dawson. I am a social worker over at the Stoughton Youth Commission. I have been with the Youth Commission since 2008. So I see youth who are school age, so anywhere from 5 years old until 18, sometimes 19, 20 if they're still in high school. I see them for individual counseling as well as their family members for family counseling as needed as well. So Gina?
My name is Gina. Just like Melissa, I am also with the Stoughton Youth Commission. I'm an intern for this year with Simmons University. Stephanie?
Sure. I'm Stephanie Patton. I'm the prevention coordinator for the town, and I have been with Stoughton doing adolescent substance abuse prevention efforts since 2012. And I'm going to turn it over to our two officers.
Hi, I'm Officer Bonda. I'm one of the school resource officers here at the Stoughton Police Department.
And I'm Officer Isabel. I'm the other school resource officers. I'm mainly based out of the high school, as Officer Bonda is out of the middle school.
All right, so you can switch the slides.
Okay. Oh, maybe.
So we're going to go over just a few ground rules before we get started. Nothing too complex. So we just wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded, and we're doing this so that we're able to offer this webinar online for future references, as well as hopefully share with the schools for the kids to get some information around their mental health as well. So we do ask that when you're sharing questions in the chat that you just respect the people in your life who may be struggling with their mental health, and try not to overshare any of their personal information or some struggles that they're having. We're not here to expose anyone. We're just here to offer some support, share some information so that we can help your teen who might be struggling. So there will be some time, hopefully at the end of this webinar, for any questions and discussions. So just put your questions in the chat and we will try to get to them. We also, if for some reason we can't get to all of the questions, we are offering our 4th night in hopes that anything that is kind of overflow from these nights will end up being discussed on the 4th night, so we won't have any questions unanswered. So yeah. Commission. So if you're looking for specific help around your own mental health, if you're a teen watching, if you're worried about a peer and you're wondering how to help, or if you're a parent who's really struggling with some of the behaviors that you're seeing and you'd like some just kind of one-on-one consults, you can always call the Youth Commission. We're available throughout the week, Monday through Friday. And our number is here on the screen, 781-341-2252. So we're also, just to let everyone know, that we will be muting all of the participants. This isn't to be rude, it's just to try to kind of block some of the background noise as we're going through the presentation, because as you will see, we have a lot of information to share. We have quite a few people hopping on to the training, so we just want to make sure that everyone can hear everything that we'll be sharing today. So next slide. So I'm going to pass it over to Officer Isabel and Officer Bonda.
So back in the fall when school started up, we formed a multidisciplinary team that was a collaboration between the police department, the school administrators, both at the high school and the middle school, as well as our town partners with OASIS and the Youth Commission. And one of the things that we did as part of this was start educating school staff on what was happening with their students around town. And then part of what we're doing tonight is informing parents of what's going on in their town as well as beyond. And at the end of this, our primary goal is to offer resources and additional educational materials for parents and teens to use in the future.
So why are we doing this? So Officer Bonda and I, obviously we see what goes on due to the positions that we hold within this community. And there was a lot of concerning things that really made us think we need to make our community aware of what's going on, because we obviously can't control everything in the community. It comes down to families and other figures in the community that are with teens more often than we are. So part of really picking apart things and figuring out what we could share, we went through every single report and every single call that we went on for all of 2019 and 2020. And what we saw was a 50% increase in mental health incidents and drug use for the ages of 12 to 25. So the numbers that we pulled were from ages 12 to 25, and that reason being was, well, in Massachusetts, at 12 years old, you can now be, you can be charged with a crime. But also at 12 years old, you've already hit middle school usually. And 25 years old, we went up to that because we still find that a lot of our teens hang with people up to 25 years old. So where that was very prevalent, we decided on those ages, that age span. We noticed a huge increase of connection with teens and substance abuse and violent crimes. So on the next slide, we're not quite there yet, but you'll see the numbers for mental health sections and overdoses and whatnot. So we have some drug use in there. I want to just say that each of these reports that we read, calls that we went on, and statistics that you see are not just, it was only a mental health call. That's not it at all. A lot of these calls that we go on have various variables. So it might be somebody that has diagnosed mental health problems, and they also have drugs with them. They are under the influence or something like that. A lot of our drug calls that we end up going on for somebody that seems to be under the influence or somebody that is selling drugs, those tend to go, somebody that has drug possession, they have like a quantity of drugs on them, tends to go hand in hand with having a weapon on them. So I just want to let you know, it's not just a straight statistic only having to do with one thing. That's what we pulled here, but you have to think of the bigger picture, that there's usually more than one variable happening at a call. Okay. So like I said, there was a huge increase in these violent and serious incidents involving juveniles in our town and the surrounding towns. And you'll see some of that later on in this, as we kind of speak through this, why we really thought there was a need in Stoughton to make the community informed of what's happening.
So this is just a chart that shows our calls for service in 4 different categories from 2019 to 2020. So the first one is mental health calls. So this can involve a call for a person out of control, and then we find out that they are being treated for some sort of mental health call. Sometimes it's someone who needs to voluntarily go to the hospital for some sort of evaluation. So in 2019, we had 32 calls that fell into this 12 to 25 age range. In 2020, we had 75. So that was more than a 50% increase in those kind of calls. Now, a Section 12, for those of you that don't know, is a mental health, it's an involuntary hospitalization. So you're required to go by ambulance to the hospital and have some sort of mental health professional evaluate you before you're let go from the hospital. So we saw almost a 50% increase from 2019 to 2020. Section 35s are court-ordered substance use evaluations, which could potentially lead to some sort of hospitalization. So in 2019, we had 1 of those. We had 5 in 2020. And then with overdoses, we had more than a 50% increase. We went from 4 to 11 in 2020. So all of those are very significant, that we've seen almost double, if not more, in all 4 of those categories.
So now we're just going to move in, you can change, we're going to move into some of the headlines that you might have seen in the news or in a newspaper, online newspaper, that have to do with our teens. So 3 under arrest and 2 firearms recovered after shots are fired in Dorchester. So this is one of our teens that they actually activated ShotSpotter one night, and then the following night were intercepted by Boston police, and 2 firearms were recovered.
So this headline, a Stoughton teen was arrested in a Boston armed robbery. They robbed a pizza delivery guy at gunpoint. He's a teen who is from Stoughton, who was hanging out with some older friends in Boston, but again, committed an armed robbery in Boston.
So 3 indicted with connection to the shooting death of Christian Vines. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard about this. They named the teen in this Jalen Wallace, and he was indicted for murder. Alyssa Joy out of Brockton, Tyleek Curry also of Stoughton. So here you see what I was talking about earlier, why we go up to 25 years old. This is just one example that our teens are hanging out with a 22-year-old. And I can tell you right now that there are younger teens in Stoughton currently that also hang out with Mr. Curry. So that are around 8th grade or so. So there is a huge gap in our kids and who they hang out with age-wise.
The next one, 3 arrested after alleged home break-in attacked in Stoughton. So as a result of this, there was a 16-year-old that was stabbed. It was a pretty significant stab wound. And at the hospital, there were 3 adults that were arrested, but there were 2 additional arrests that were made. Both of them were Stoughton juveniles. So this was, again, a wide age range. So you had 2 16-year-olds hanging out with 18, 19, 20-year-olds during this home break-in.
And I just want you to note, every single person that was involved in this incident was from Stoughton, was a Stoughton resident, went to Stoughton schools. Here you have 1 arrested after Stoughton carjacking. This goes up to that 25-year-old mark that I was talking about, and had other ties to Stoughton as well.
Stoughton teen threatens woman with BB gun. This was per the Boston police. So there was one of our teenagers that was hanging out in Boston. I believe this was actually Charlestown. And he ended up threatening her with what ended up being a BB gun. And they did identify him and subsequently arrest him.
This has to do with an indictment with Joseph Green, who's 22 at the time. And as I said before, this just shows you again the charges, that extreme charges really that he is facing and was sentenced to. High levels of drugs, the amount of drugs, and his age and how he's wrapped up in that already at such a young age.
There's also been a few other noteworthy incidents in Stoughton over the last couple years. Actually, most of these are since mid-2019. They didn't necessarily make the headlines because part of it is just what we can release to the media and whatnot regarding juveniles. But we can share with you the gist of what happened with those. So Stoughton teen among 3 arrested on firearms charges following a shooting in Boston, and a firearm was again recovered with that one. We had a juvenile arrested for possession of controlled substances and an illegal firearm. We had an armed robbery that resulted in the arrest of 3 teenagers. And then we had 2 Stoughton teens arrested in connection with breaking and entering at the Army Navy store.
And then the other one would be what we had already talked about from Charlestown.
Okay, so thank you for sharing all of those headlines. So as we can see, just from what our officers are sharing with us, there's definitely been a spike and an increase in our youth and violent crimes, which kind of led to the discussion on why, what is happening with our teens, what is going on. And we speculate that a lot of it has to do with poor mental health, support around mental health, because as we know, when your mental health is not well, when you don't have good coping mechanisms and strategies, sometimes we turn to riskier behaviors, which is the link that we are now seeing between mental health and these violent crime offenses, as well as these increases now that we're seeing in emergency departments with mental health visits from both elementary age children and teenagers. So this slide shows, most importantly, the 31% increase in mental health emergency department visits just by teenagers alone. So we're going to give some information and some resources around mental health in hopes that, the more information that you have as a teen or as a parent, the more protective factors you have to not add to these statistics that the officers are showing you that are increasing by the day in our town. So next slide. So what is mental health? So let's cover the basics here. So when we say your mental health, what do we mean by this? So mental health is more of a general term that covers your mental state, your overall well-being. So this can include your emotional, psychological, social well-being. It affects how you think, how you feel, how you act. It determines how you handle stress, the methods that you are turning to in coping with your stress. That determines whether they're healthier or not so healthy choices to be making. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood to adolescence through adulthood. I personally think it's even more so important from the beginning, from childhood and adolescence, because this is how we are hoping to prepare and help our kids grow up to be successful adults. So it's affecting every age group. So if you can switch the slide. So I do want to cover a little bit about mental illness, because I think that sometimes people confuse the term mental health and mental illness, and they're two very different things. So mental illness is defined as conditions that affect a person's thinking, feeling, mood, behavior. It can be considered depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. It can be occasional, it can be long-lasting, which is what we mean when we say something is chronic in the medical field, and it affects someone's ability to relate to others and function each day. So we know that emotional disorders are emerging the most during adolescence. So that's something to keep in mind. And in fact, now globally with this pandemic, we're seeing that depression is now the 4th leading illness and disability among kids between 15 and 19. Anxiety is actually the 9th leading illness. So it is affecting our youth even more so now. So again, this slide just states that even though the terms mental health, mental illness are used interchangeably, poor mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. So remember that a person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with an actual mental illness, just like someone who is diagnosed with a mental illness can still have periods of good physical, mental, and social well-being. So, and just a stat, so the CDC states that 1 in 5 youth now, either currently or at some point during their life, have had a serious debilitating mental illness. So you can switch the slide. So this leads us to the pandemic, which everyone is dealing with, and we are right smack in the middle of it. And the pandemic equals stress, right? So no matter who you are, if you're young, if you're older, if you're a teen, if you're a parent, the pandemic has brought on some sort of stress into your life. I think everyone's mental health, even the helpers, are feeling a decline in their mental health overall, because this is a weird, unfamiliar time with lots of transitions. Some transitions are smooth, some are anything but smooth. And we know that the key deciding factor into how your mental health is holding up, whether your mental health is good or poor, is how you're managing your stress and everything around you. And the pandemic has certainly thrown some stress curveballs at our teens. So I think that as parents, sometimes we have so many worries about running the household that we forget that our kids are also coming to the table with their own set of worries that may not even be on our radar. So I did want to take at least a minute or two for us to kind of think about what we think some of those stressors may be that may have been added to our kids' plates during this pandemic. So if you can take a minute to just put in the chat maybe some stressors that you think the kids are dealing with right now, or if you are a teen and you are tuning in and you feel comfortable sharing some of the stressors that now you are dealing with that you never did before the pandemic, we would appreciate hearing some of your responses. So I'll give folks just a little bit to add some things in there. So thank you. I see that people are responding. So Steph, I don't know if you are you able to read them off or?
I can, let's see. So people are talking about isolation, being at home with family, home learning, no hugs, hybrid learning, increased screen time, less organized events, sports, missing social gatherings, isolation, lots of hybrid learning. And you got a hi from Mrs. B. Being cut off from their friends, not being able to hang out together. Yep.
These are great.
All of these things. These are great.
Awesome.
I mean, they're not great, but they're great that you guys are participating. Yep. Anxiety from being cut off from sports and activities and clubs since the beginning of COVID. Yep.
All right. So we heard quite a few stressors just from the teens over at Needham High School. So those include worrying about becoming sick or a loved one becoming sick. I know many of us have played the do I have the COVID, worry game almost weekly. Every time someone gets a sniffle or a cough, it's a high stress time. So our anxiety is already up just from worrying about getting sick ourselves or worrying about others getting sick too. The unknowns around how long this, new normal, even though there's really nothing normal about it, how long this is going to last, if things are ever going to go back to normal. The lack of social connection, isolation. I know people had stated that a few times in the chat, totally spot on. These kids are isolated from their peers. If they're dating, if they're teens and they're dating, they're isolated from their dating relationships. If they had learning issues pre-pandemic, it might be even more of a struggle to get through school learning remotely. If they had no learning issues, they may be starting to see some now because this is a whole new way of learning that kids are not used to. There's been some loss of routine and schedule and feeling out of control. Sometimes this affects sleep. If there's no routine, if kids are sleeping less than they're supposed to, that alone is going to affect their concentration every day at school, how they're feeling about themselves, their moods, how irritable they're feeling. Sleep is so important. So is routine and schedule. And that's getting lost for sure in the pandemic. Again, poor concentration, even more so at home. So you saw the young lady mention that it's so hard for her to focus at home because, our kids have their video game systems at home. They have TV, computer, their music library is there, their movie library is there. So those are all just factors working against getting motivated to actually do your schoolwork when you have all these fun things so accessible to you in your home. Worrying about college in the future, missing out on major milestone events like proms, class nights, award nights. We've seen kids worry about just simple things like food insecurities, things that we don't even sometimes think about, but there's a percentage of kids that missing school means that they may be missing breakfast and lunch every day. So that's also a stressor facing some of our kids. Loss of their sports clubs, which are all different kinds of activities and exercises that some kids might be using to help with their stress and management of their stress. A parent might lose their job during this pandemic, which totally affects the finances in the home and affects the whole family. So some kids are struggling with that. Possible increases in violence and abuse in the homes. We know that, domestic violence is real. It's happening in some of these kids' homes. And we know that being home every day, it's heightened. So kids are stressed out about that as well. Grief from actually losing a loved one. We know that there have been some losses to this virus and we're not exempt from that in Stoughton. So the kids are definitely losing loved ones and dealing with their grief during this time. Just the world outside of their home right now. So not even thinking about the pandemic, you turn on the news and it seems like everything is falling apart in a scary place. So just everyday news is also a huge stressor right now during the pandemic. I do want to talk a little bit about where we are in the year. So we're now entering the winter months during a pandemic, which is the first time this has happened since the start of this in March. So now, we're concerned about seasonal affective disorder. It's may start to show up. It might get a little more severe now that the weather is colder, the months are longer, the days are a little darker and longer too. So we know that according to PubMed and the Web of Science's analysis of 12 different studies, depression and anxiety is 7 times higher now in our youth since the pandemic, 7 times. So that's just something to keep in mind, because these are the numbers that we're starting to see pre-winter months in the pandemic. And the reason I mention that is because now that we are right smack dab in the winter, I feel like we're going to see a little bit of a spike, especially from kids who might have seasonal affective disorder, which is a type of depression that occurs at the same time every year, usually in the winter months, and normally it subsides as the weather gets warmer and the sun comes out a little bit more. So if you have kids that have been trucking along and have been doing really well during this pandemic up until now, you may see a little bit of a decline in their mental health. If you have kids that have been struggling with depression, you may see their symptoms become a little bit more severe over the next couple of months. So this was also one of the motivating factors for us to do this training at this time of the year, especially because we just want to be proactive in what might be coming down the pike for us with mental health. So so if you're a teen logging in, you're wondering what to look for in yourself, or if you have a peer that you're worried about, or if you're a parent and you're unsure of what to look out for in your teen, we are going to cover all of that now. So I'm going to pass it along to Gina, who is going to begin the discussion on just signs and symptoms to be aware of.
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, and like what Melissa was saying, because of COVID, we are seeing a rise in depression and anxiety. Sometimes signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety might overlap. Some of these signs and symptoms might look similar between the two, but there are some differences. So for depression, there can be some feelings of sadness. Sometimes crying for no reason might be occurring. Frustration or feelings of anger, even over small things, feeling hopeless or empty, maybe feeling like things aren't going to get better, irritable or annoyed mood, loss of interest in usual activities, maybe not looking forward to the activities that you do still have that are going on, loss of interest or conflict with friends and family, low self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, fixating on past failures or being too hard on yourself, extreme sensitivity to rejection or failure, need for constant reassurance, being told that you're doing great, that need might be increasing, trouble thinking, concentrating, making decisions, and remembering things, feeling like your life and the future are grim, and in some cases, frequent thoughts of death, dying, or suicide might be coming up when you're feeling depressed or noticing when others are depressed. And for anxiety, like I said, some of the things I said before might be signs of anxiety, but some additional ones are feeling panic, fear, or uneasiness, having nightmares, uncontrollable and obsessive thoughts, really fixating on certain things, maybe an event that happened that day can be really challenging to get out of your mind. Difficulty staying calm and still, trouble sleeping, panic and anxiety attacks, and having trouble breathing. And now we have some tips to improve your mental health during the pandemic. And so I think one of the first things is just to recognize that the stress you're feeling about this pandemic is normal. I think most of us are definitely feeling the pandemic on our lives and how things are more challenging. Try to seek help and support from others. You can talk to a friend, various family members. If you're a student, you could talk to your teacher or a school social worker or counselor. You can speak to a therapist. Maybe you're seeing one or you're interested in meeting with a therapist. There are various therapists that you could see based on your insurance, or if you live in Stoughton, families can reach out to the Stoughton Youth Commission. Take care of your emotional health, take care of your body, taking breaks from watching, reading, or listening to the news. This could be news on the TV, maybe alerts that we get on our phones, which sometimes feel constant. Even unplugging from social media. I know a lot of people get their news just from Facebook or Instagram and different social media apps. Make time to unwind, connect with others, do things that you enjoy, and just be kind to yourself and others. Like I said, this is a really challenging time, and just reminding yourself that you're doing the best you can make a difference. And now I have a couple of things to go over on how you can help your peers who might be struggling with depression and anxiety. So there are 4 different things that can be helpful when you are trying to help somebody. You can ask. So when asking somebody, you want to tell maybe your friend, family member, whoever it is that you're approaching, ask them if they're feeling okay. Maybe mention that you're noticing some differences in them. Maybe they are not reaching out as much as they normally do, or that they're looking down. Next, you want to listen. You want to listen fully to what they have to say. Take them seriously and try your best not to interrupt or judge them. Third is to encourage action. So let your friend know that you're concerned about them and encourage them to seek help. This could be with another trusting adult, like a parent or guardian, maybe a counselor at school or a teacher that they feel really close to. And finally, check in. We have somebody joining the group. Fourth is to check in. You can say things like, I was thinking about the conversation we had the other day, and I just wanted to check in and make sure and see how you were doing. When you check in, your friend or family member, whoever you're checking in with, is going to notice that you care, and they do appreciate that you're checking in with them. And I think now we have a video on how you can support a friend that might be in need of help.
Guys, you guys seen this?
What? What's going on?
I must have missed it.
Oh, about Adam.
Yeah, I saw that this morning. It's so sad.
Man, he used to hang out with us.
Yeah, and then he just stopped. I hope he's gonna be okay.
I wish we had noticed the signs and done something.
Fact is, 1 in 5 of us has a mental health condition, but emotional pain can be hard to spot and harder to talk about. Learn the 5 signs of emotional suffering: personality change, agitation, withdrawal, poor self-care, and hopelessness. If you see 1 or more of these signs in someone you care about, reach out,
Megan,
connect, and offer to help.
come sit with us.
Together, we can change the direction of mental health in America.
We were just talking about the literature exam.
And our answers for question 4.
Learn the signs and how to help. Visit changedirection.org.
And so that video is, I think, a good way to display a way in which you could support a friend.
Or even share the video with youth who may not be tuning in, but still would like ways on knowing how to help others. So, okay, so parents, what should we be looking for? Is my teen depressed? So right off the bat, changes in mood, irritability, or anger. This is a really big one in mental health concerns around kids. Just because we mentioned this right off the bat, because it's important to note that depression doesn't always rear its ugly head in ways that, you know, we've been so sensitive to seeing in the media or on TV. You know, it's not always the textbook general sadness, moping around, crying uncontrollably. Sometimes in our kids, it's low frustration tolerance. It's having a short fuse. It's not being able to deal with much. It's making a huge deal about little things. And everything around you is, you know, crumbling, and because that's how it feels at the time. And just being really easily bothered. So we want to look out for especially irritability, because that is a big one. Changes in sleep, as I mentioned before, too much or too little. Sleep in itself can exacerbate symptoms of depression. You know, not having enough sleep can affect your concentration, your school performance, how you feel about yourself, your self-care. So even, you know, just focusing on making sure that your child is getting enough sleep, you may see a huge difference in other areas that you might be worried about. So sleep first, I always tell parents, is check on the sleep first and try to support a good sleep schedule for your child first and foremost. Changes in appetite. So maybe you're noticing that your child is eating too much or too little, not at all. We also want to note that during the pandemic, we're also seeing a spike in eating disorders among some kids. I mean, we are home all day around food. It's a little bit more difficult to control these things. So kids with anxiety and kids who are already struggling with body image and eating disorders are having an exceptionally difficult time right now during the pandemic as well. So keep an eye out on that. Changes in enjoying activities. Maybe your kids were super into going for walks or video chatting with friends, and now they don't want to do any of the above. So that would be a change that you would notice. Being socially withdrawn from their friends and family members, changes in their appearance, lack of self-care. Maybe they're not showering often. You're noticing a decline in their hygiene. Their school performance may start to drop a little bit, their grades. Other things to look out for, the continuous feelings of sadness and hopelessness do sometimes show up. Increased sensitivity to rejection, or always feeling like they're rejected, even if, you know, that doesn't make much sense or isn't the reality of it. It feels very real when you are struggling with depression. Vocal outbursts or crying. Difficulty concentrating, low energy. If they're experiencing physical complaints that don't make sense, like reporting stomach aches all the time, headaches, you brought them to the doctor, there's no explanation medically for it. These are all part of struggling with anxiety and depression. Of course, the reduced ability to function during events, whether it be at home, at school, in extracurricular activities, just not caring about their hobbies or interests anymore, having some feelings of worthlessness and feeling guilty about things that aren't their fault or don't make sense as to why they would feel guilty. That is a common symptom to look out for. And then, of course, expressing thoughts about death or suicide. So you can switch. So how can I help my teen during this time? If you are a parent and you are wondering what in the world you can do to try to help kind of make this time a little bit more difficult. So it starts with you. So self-care, parents, we have to start by taking care of you, ourselves, right? So there is a saying that I absolutely love that I try to remind myself of, is that you can't fill other people's buckets if your well is empty. So we have to figure out how to keep our well full during this time so that we can help our families, we can help our kids, we can help each other. So some of the ways that you can practice self-care, the most important thing is focusing on the things that you can actually control. So we know that there are so many things going on right now in the pandemic that are absolutely out of our control. We don't have the answers to these things, and it really helps no one focusing and obsessing on the things that are not manageable right now. So focus on the things that you can. So the things that you can control: how you feel, how you react, and this is all part of your own self-care. So some of the things you can do for yourself: try to keep a regular schedule. So this includes making sure that you yourself are getting enough sleep, along with ensuring that your child is, because then that just helps everybody involved if everybody is sleeping well. Make sure that you are checking in with friends and family who you consider to be supportive, especially during stressful times. You want to still try to adhere to social distancing, obviously, when you're connecting with loved ones. So still try to use, Zooming and video chatting, outdoor visits, things like that. Pretty much you want to just try to find things that you find healthy and relaxing. So do some yoga, walking, dancing, meditation. All of these things are good for your own mental health. So setting some boundaries on your schedule, trying to get some fresh air and exercising. Like Gina mentioned, unplugging from social media, because sometimes that just keeps us feeling stressed and stuck in that place when we're not able to unplug. And of course, finding time for yourself to do all of the things that I mentioned and gave some suggestions on. So the other ways that we can help our kids, especially if you are worried that they are feeling depressed or anxious, I'm going to go over these 3 steps. It's notice and I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So notice is the first step. So obviously you want to look for changes in your teen's behavior right away. You want to try to check in daily by encouraging open and honest conversations. The best way to do this is to avoid simple yes and no questions, right? So for example, you pick your kid up from school. Did you have a good day at school? Normally that is answered with a yeah. And then it's hard to really go any further from there. So instead, maybe try, what happened today at school? Because then that encourages more dialogue, more than a yes or no answer. And maybe you might get some information from asking an open-ended question like that. So helping your teen understand that, this is a difficult time for everyone. If you feel like sharing some struggles that you're having too, as a parent, that, it's hard for you as well. If you feel like that's appropriate and that's helpful, share away. Obviously, always utilize school support services and therapeutic agencies like the Youth Commission if you're feeling stuck and struggling with how to talk to your child, or if you're not even sure if what they're going through is normal or of a concern. You can always reach out to the Youth Commission for consult and support as you go as well. So the next step in helping is talk. So we want you to try to set up a time to chat and check in regularly with your child and actually follow through. It's great to check in, but then if you do it once and then you don't do it again for another 10 days, 2 weeks, or until things are really bad, it defeats the whole purpose. So we want to try to regularly do this, kind of make it part of your day as a family, is checking in. Again, use the open-ended questions, affirmations. You want to reflect on what your child is saying. You want to try to summarize back what they've told you they have felt, because that makes someone feel heard, which feels good. So I'm giving you some of my secrets that we use in counseling, but we want you to try to use it at home with your kids too. So notice some body language, hints that they're showing you with their body, how they're feeling. Are they uncomfortable? Are they closing down as you're asking? Are they getting visibly upset as you're asking how they're feeling? Or if things are, not going so great for them, pay attention. And it's okay to say, hey, I noticed that you're getting, tearful when we're talking about that. Can you tell me a little bit about why? So those are some examples of some open-ended questions. And then, of course, if you're concerned about how your child is doing at school, if you don't feel like you have the whole picture on how difficult things are, you can always check in with school staff and get an update on how they are doing on their end. So tips on talking to your child. We know that talking to teens sometimes is not the easiest thing to do. So even just starting the conversation can sometimes feel really difficult. So we just wanted to give you some examples on kind of how to open the conversation, how to keep it going. And we are going to go in a little bit more into how to assess for safety as well. So some statements that you can use: can you tell me more about what is happening? How are you feeling? Have you had feelings like this in the past? Sometimes you need to talk to an adult about your feelings. I'm here to listen. How can I help you feel better? If you feel like you're not going anywhere, do you feel like you want to talk to someone else about your problem? And of course, if you're worried about your safety, being direct. I'm worried about your safety. Can you tell me if you're having thoughts about harming yourself or others? When we're talking about mental health problems with your teen, you should remember communication in a straightforward manner is always the best way. You want to try to, speak at a level that's appropriate. It's age appropriate. if you're talking about symptoms in ways that only adults understand, the conversation is probably not going to go very far. So just kind of keep in mind who your audience is and how to discuss things so that people can understand them fully. So again, watch for reactions during the discussion, slow down if you have to, back up if your teen becomes confused. It's okay if you don't have the right answer to make them feel better. It's really about listening, being supportive, and letting your child know that you are there when they are ready to talk. So listen openly, let your teen tell you about his feelings. And I know that sometimes things may come out that may strike some emotions in parents, but it's really important to kind of keep that at bay. So also make sure that before you're talking to kids, that it's the right time emotionally for you as well to talk to kids, because you want to be able to have the full conversation, listen fully, not get angry. We don't want kids to feel like they're in trouble for having any of these thoughts or feelings. So next slide. So how do I assess for safety? So we know that I know that when I mentioned assessing for safety, I know that this can increase some anxiety when we're thinking about how to do this. So I'm just going to share some tips on what to ask and how. So if you're worried that your child is thinking about wanting to die or committing suicide, you should be assessing for safety immediately. Don't sleep on it. You want to get right in there and just right to the meat and potatoes to rule it out and to make sure. So you want to be direct and you want to ask, are you having thoughts about wanting to die or kill yourself? Have you thought about how you might do this? Try to avoid making statements like, do you want to hurt yourself? Because sometimes our kids may be self-harming with no intention to actually die or wanting to die. So we don't want to confuse the two and make the area too gray. So that's why we're saying be direct, make sure you're asking, do you want to die? Have you thought about how? Do you have any plans? How can I help you? Right? So remember that if you ask someone if they want to kill themselves, this does not drive them toward the action. I know that some people have a lot of anxiety about mentioning it or asking it because they think that it's going to increase the thought, but that's actually a myth and it's not accurate at all. So don't be afraid to ask the question. It's better to ask than to not ask and leave it unsaid and not helping those who are in need of help. So always ensure that your child is safe and that your priority is keeping them safe. Again, they are not in trouble for having these feelings that they're struggling with. All right. And then, of course, the last step in helping your child, if you are worried about them having depression and thinking about suicide, is act. So if immediate danger is not present, but you're still kind of concerned that they're down and they're feeling depressed, then this would be a great time to try to set up some supportive services for your teen on an ongoing basis. So you can connect with places like the Youth Commission, Riverside Counseling, just so that they get that ongoing support during this time. If you do feel like your child is in crisis, they are reporting to you that they are having thoughts of wanting to die, they are thinking about plans, then obviously your immediate action is to call 911, as your child might benefit from an emergency crisis evaluation. So I also want to share this really great resource. It's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So it is a 24-hour operation, 7 days a week. It's a good number to also share with your teen if you're concerned about depression with your teen, just for them to have on hand if they need somebody to talk to. Or even if you get stuck and you're not exactly sure what to do, or if your teen is really showing immediate signs of danger, you can call this hotline and speak to a professional who can walk you through what your next steps should be, and also even speak to your teen if they are open to getting some support from a professional on the hotline. So we just shared this number just as a resource. It's 1-800-273-TALK. So our last section of our presentation is on the link between substance use and mental health. So as we have stated before, we do know that when people are struggling with their mental health, they are more susceptible to cope with their mental health in risky, unsafe ways. So if you can change the slide, staff. So we know that many risk-taking behaviors for health, such as substance use or sexual risk-taking, start during adolescence, and that risk-taking behaviors can both be an unhelpful strategy to cope with poor mental health, and it can also severely impact an adolescent's mental and physical well-being. So we did want parents to know the signs to look for in case your teen is coping with their mental health and their stresses in their life in an unhealthy way by using substances. So I am now going to turn it over to Stephanie, who will be sharing some of this information with parents on what to look for.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. I'm just going to do a couple quick slides here because I know we're coming up on time and I want you to be able to ask questions as well. So a couple of quick statistics here. Adolescents and young adults with a mental health disorder who also have a co-occurring substance use disorder. So, we find that adolescents who already have a mental health disorder, 30 to 45% of them also might be having challenges with substance use at the same time. And for young people who have substance use disorders, up to 65% of them may also have a mental health disorder. So we know these things are related. And as Melissa talked about, sometimes young people use substances to cope with mental health stressors, and sometimes substances can contribute to mental health challenges. So it's important to be, if you're concerned about one, you should be thinking about the other and asking about that as well. We know that a lot of substances can really pose a serious risk for actually contributing to developing mental health disorders. We're going to talk more about some of these things in our upcoming workshops. But one of the things that I think is really important, and it's a really new piece of research, is around regular marijuana use. And, sort of going back to the beginning when the officers were sharing about, sometimes there are these myths around, marijuana is harmless. It's a sort of a drug that doesn't involve any risk or crime. We know that not only is that untrue, but also, now, especially high potency marijuana is shown to increase the risk of psychosis by up to 5 times. It's really significant and it's really scary. So we can, if people have more questions, we can talk about that. But that's just one of the places where you can see risk. So one of the things that we know about alcohol and other drugs is they can be kind of reinforcing, right? So in the short term, sometimes alcohol, marijuana, some other drugs, medications can help people to relax. This is what some of these things are created for, right? It might help alleviate boredom for kids who want to try to fit in or maybe have some social anxiety in situations. Sometimes, we talk about alcohol as a social lubricant, right? It does sometimes help people to feel like it's easier to fit in. People often use these things to escape emotional or physical pain. There are ways to deal with traumatic memories and block those out. People use substances to relieve anxiety. They use substances to help them to sleep, and some people use substances to help them get up or to stay awake. We see that as well, and sometimes for weight loss, depending on the substances. So in the short term, sometimes these drugs can really do these things for people. There are significant long-term impacts, sometimes that are the reverse of a lot of these things. But you could imagine how, especially for an adolescent, it might feel like it's working. And that's how sometimes we get into a lot of trouble with some of these kinds of things. So some of the changes that you might see if you were concerned about your teenager, and these are times, again, sort of going back to the same tips that Melissa had shared about talking to your kid. If you start to see these things, and again, you're going to see some of the stuff mimics, right? It might look like depression. It might look like anxiety. So anytime, you know your child best. If you start to see things that are, something doesn't feel right, that feels off, like these are times to have a conversation with your child and try to understand what's going on. So loss of interest in hobbies or extracurricular activities, big changes in friendships. Suddenly they're not hanging out or interested in the people that they were friends with before. They might have a new set of friends. They might just not be hanging out with anybody. Mood swings. Sometimes I laugh because some of these things are just like what happens with adolescence, right? But it's always a good opportunity to have a conversation. Irritability, argumentativeness, maybe being unusually agitated, restless, hyperactive, not being able to sort of sit still at all. Or the reverse, like, lack of motivation, being lethargic, not wanting to get up off the couch. If your child is suddenly locking doors to you, being very private, isolating themselves, avoiding family events or family gatherings, you might start to see changes in school. A lot of times we'll see declining grades, or kids are suddenly skipping school, or they're skipping work if that was something that they were doing. They might appear to be more accident prone, or tell you that they're more accident prone. You might see, strange physical things going on. They might be engaging in other risky behaviors that were not things that were happening for them before. Suddenly maybe they're borrowing or taking money. Valuables might disappear from your house. Or you might be missing things like prescription drugs or alcohol, and we always say to parents, it's really important to lock up those things, or to, have a good way of keeping stock of that stuff, so that it is not a temptation for young people. And to sort of circle back to what Melissa was saying, we also know that there is a relationship between suicide and substances. 75% of suicides actually involve one or more substances. 69% of suicides involve alcohol intoxication. Unfortunately, drugs and alcohol and suicide and depression are a really dangerous mix. We know that alcohol and other drugs can reduce inhibition, so it can, somebody might make a decision under the influence that could be really fatal. And so it's really important to be paying attention to both signs of substance use, as well as mental health, emotional distress, and to be asking and sort of probing for both of those things. Really, if you see one, you should be thinking about the other. And so I think that's sort of my really quick overview of some of that stuff. We are going to get more in depth, particularly around marijuana, in the next 2 sessions. And we wanted to be sure that we were sharing some resources before we take questions. So I don't know if Melissa or Gina, if you guys quickly, if you want to highlight any of the things that are here.
Yep. So of course we, wanted to share the Stoughton Youth Commission number in case any parents are in need of some support. You can contact us at the Youth Commission. We are there Monday through Friday during normal business hours. So we are working from home, but we are checking our emails and our messages throughout the day regularly. So that's always a resource if you live in town. We offer free counseling services to youth. And family therapy if needed around that youth too. So something to take advantage of, especially if your family could use the support. We've also added the Stoughton OASIS Coalition, which Stephanie is the head of. So there is also the website if you'd like to get more involved in that, or just gain some information around youth and substances and prevention work. And then, of course, we added the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is, I had shared that through the presentation, along with the National Distress Helpline, Mass 211, which offers a variety of different supports and referral services around mental health. And then, of course, immediate helplines that you can utilize in times of crisis, 911, always number one to call during a crisis. Disaster distress helpline, child abuse hotline, domestic violence hotline, just different resources in case there is a need. And then, of course, we wanted to give nods to the places that we got all of this information to put this presentation together for you. But there are also helpful links too, if you want to just kind of further your knowledge around teen mental health, teen substance use. These are some great websites to check out, and just, knowledge is power. So it's all there for you. And then, of course, we wanted to share our upcoming dates to the rest of the series. So today was night 1. Our second night will be on the 26th next week on a Tuesday. We'll be covering marijuana in teens. The following Tuesday, which will be February 2nd, we will go into marijuana and the law. And as mentioned, we are saving the 4th and final night for kind of any overflow in topics that were we want to cover just a little bit more fully, that maybe we didn't get to or didn't get to really dive in as deep as we wanted to because of time constraints. We know that a lot of us are in front of the computers all day long, so we were trying to keep this as short and sweet as possible. So please join us for the next 3 dates. And if you have any questions that you think of, you can always save them and bring them that 4th night as well.